Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you'll see a little link down below. You can click on that and you'll end up in Zoom. And once you're there, you can see another link and you'll click on that and you'll end up in Mukana. And once you're there, you become one of our producers. You actually drive the entire show with your questions, your comments, and your votes. So we'd love to have you join us there. If the first hour is just general discussion about whatever you want to ask around media or virtual production, second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Nick Batt is here. Nick Batt has been a remixer, producer, live sound engineer, musician, and many other things. And he has a very successful YouTube channel and podcast. And so we're excited to have Nick here for the show. And we're going to talk about his journey. And then tomorrow, we're going to talk about Luma keying in the ATEM. A lot of us have done that. A lot of people just go to chroma key. There's a reason to use Luma key, and we'll talk about why and how. Thursday, we've got Darren Okada, who's a friend of mine. He used to be the president of the American Society of Cinematographers, ASC, and he's done an incredible amount of work. And so we're going to talk about him and his art. And then on Friday, we're going to talk about methods for streaming to YouTube, what you want to think about, how the whole process works, and how to get ahead with it. And then finally, on Saturday, we have 2 hours. Emily Russo is now the host for Saturdays, and we have the education from 9 to 11. It's just a great conversation. So we highly recommend coming. We don't stream that one so that the teachers can speak freely. so anyway, come check us out for that. All right, Bill, let's go ahead and jump into the questions.
Absolutely. Good morning, Alex. And Gabriel Ung from Malaysia has our first question. He says, Market America sells Zoom enterprise accounts on their site. Is this possible? Is it a way to get business accounts without the minimum quota of 10 licenses? Does Zoom allow this? Are there potential dangers in getting one of these licenses? And he has a link there.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So I'm not sure about Market America specifically, but you will see organizations out there with different models for a relationship with Zoom. Zoom has partner programs and reseller programs. So there will be groups out there getting into that ecosystem. But for business accounts in general, for the 10 users, I mean, that's a question you can put to Zoom. I know they have a very capable and accommodating sales and account management team. So open that conversation with them. All they can do is say no. And even if they do, you'll gain a point of contact. Maybe that's a future relationship, but they may be able to accommodate your requirements. The risks or the dangers involved is, I mean, it's a give and take situation. I can imagine how they may, if they can accommodate, you may want to ask you to sign a contract or something like that for a particular term. So just open the conversation with them and see what happens.
Yeah. There's a lot of deals going on. You do want to talk to Zoom about it if you're going to do something like that, because technically it is a violation of the TOS. So unless you have a specific agreement, I don't think you can resell Zoom licenses directly. Go ahead, Jonas.
Earlier there was just an ISV program, so you could integrate Zoom into your program, and there was still some regulations on reselling, but right. They lately added a new, on their partner.zoom in the US, they added a new category, which is just sell, where you can directly resell.
There you go.
Have a lot of new categories of partnership.
That's great. Next question.
Well, Jonas was just answering that one, and he has the next question out of Reulingen, Germany. I will be doing my first live stream on Thursday as a talent in a while. Any tips on being the talent versus the normal being the tech?
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
The goal is to be the ringmaster, effectively to.
Well, the question is that are you host, Jonas, or are you someone on a panel? Because it's two very different.
I'll be alone in front of the camera answering questions about Player B and other stuff.
Got it.
So yeah, I mean, I would say that the way to do that. How do I put it? Don't do what I'm doing right now, which is stammering.
To give you a moment, one of the best things that I was told that I've used for many years now is I walked into Tech TV. I'd never done this before, and I looked up at one of the interns or production assistants or whatever, who's a guy named Kevin Rose at the time. And I said, so how do you do this? Do you have any secrets? And he goes, yeah, just be yourself, plus 25%. And it turns out that is pretty much it. If you meet me in person, you'll notice that when I'm on this show, or especially when I'm on Mac Break, that I'm just a little more than I am when I'm in person, and that's because you just need to project through the camera just a little bit. Not a lot. If you do it too much, then it seems like you're going crazy. Like, how's it going? And then next thing someone's waiting for is like this week and blah blah blah. And so those are the things that you want to try to avoid. You want to just be authentic, but you then want to you just need to have a little more energy than you would have in person. Go ahead, Bill.
I couldn't agree with Alex more. It really is a process. You are performing a little bit. And as we watch people, the one thing that really drags a show down is just dullness. So you want to sparkle a little bit, but his comments about authenticity are 150%. If you try to be someone you're not to project a character, it usually fails. Project yourself and amp it up just a bit and you'll be great.
Jonas, do you see the people? Are you doing it over Zoom? Are you going to see people asking questions, or are you just going to get questions?
It will be a normal YouTube live stream for now.
So the one thing you want to do if you don't have Zoom or someone there, you just want to imagine you're talking to someone right behind the camera. So just really kind of, we used to, in radio, when we were training people, we literally give them a picture to look at, of someone to look at, and just talk to that person, because you're not talking to everyone. You're talking to each person individually, and you want to kind of keep that in mind as well. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
What I used to do when I started my podcast was I would create little scripts at the beginning, like for instance, welcome to the show and stuff like that. And then when I'm in the car, I just sit there and I go over and over and over again and do that from there. As for the answering questions, very important to make sure that the questions that are being asked, because this can get out of hand, especially if lots of questions start passing by, and then all of a sudden you see somebody from, a name, and you read the name, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, that's a troll right there. And trying to keep on track with those questions, might be tough when the questions start to go through.
When are you doing your live stream?
Thursday, probably around 1 or 2 hours after post show.
Okay, definitely let us know what the time is. We'll maybe pack a couple people in the hall. Go ahead, Paul. Can't hear you, Paul.
I'm having trouble with the mute button. Hey, what I would recommend, Jonas, is you're incredibly on top of it when it comes to content, but you're a little laid back. So what I would do is talk faster. Just try concentrating on talking just a little bit faster.
I wouldn't worry about that kind of thing at this point in time. Like for your first one, I wouldn't think through. There's a real danger in thinking about mechanics. Like you want to think about where you want to be and who you want to be, but thinking about it's you don't want to think about the mechanics of how you do it. It'll make you self-conscious. Go ahead, Sky.
Practice, practice, practice. And that's what you've been doing now for a long, long time. So A, you've been doing a lot of this already. B, giving yourself permission to fail and continuing to, as you do the next show and the next show, learn from the last time. But we used to do all of this in front of a mirror as actors, and now we've got cameras and technology. So you've got your technology wired, but now it's an attitude thing. And so that personality thing is you're talking to one other person.
Go ahead, Jason.
At the end of the day, it all comes down to pacing for me. So embellish on the things that, might not be clear to everybody in your audience, but don't drag. And at the same time, don't be afraid to push into something that interests you, because being able to push onto your audience what interests you will gauge more questions that in turn, may go down a different line.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, Jason's got it on the nose there. If the questions are what you want to talk about, that's great. But have a small list of things you want them to know in case the questions run a little thin.
Good, Hasma.
Yeah, I find thinking too much about what you're going to say as you're saying it becomes a problem. It also becomes, so you just let your thoughts flow through. I know you need to manage what you're saying, but don't spend too much time on the mechanical side of separating, of thinking what you're going to say and what you're saying.
Good, Peter.
Yeah, I was going to say essentially what Hasmuth just said, but the other thing I would say is make sure, like Ken made, make sure you have some key talking points that you can help them stay on track with. I mean, I've had to go through a number of RFP deliveries where I'm the one responding via video conference, or before that in person, and you wanted to stay on track.
politician's secret is that you have the things you want to say and you're looking for questions that allow you to say them. When I teach classes, I'll teach a class and I'll ask everybody who they are, why they're here, what they want to get out of this. And I will teach half the, like literally it'll take 3 hours to get through that, but that's because I'm using what they said to say something that needs to be said. So you want to have the things you want to cover, and then you look for those as points. You still want to answer the question, but you want to use that as context. Rupert, then Guy, real quick, and then we'll move on.
So in a Q&A environment, I just try and keep a notepad open with listening for the questions, and then have some bullet points of just keywords that I want to cover. And then if I hear somebody has already covered them, I'll delete them so I don't repeat information that's already gone on. But also Zoom just recently published a blog article with several tips on how to run a engaging video meeting. Maybe things we already know, but just check it out as a refresher.
Good, Guy.
Yeah, I like to have a loose run of show, an outline to hit those points to make sure I bring home the bacon, so to speak. So make sure you hit those. And if it is going to be a Q&A style, what I've learned from this program is let somebody else handle the Q&A so that you can concentrate on being present. Because if you're not present, if you're off reading those, it's going to be noticed by the audience. So if you need help, I'd love to volunteer to help you out and read the questions if you need any help.
I'm sure you could get people here to volunteer to help. So if you have any need there, let us know. Absolutely. We'd love to help. Next question.
Didn't hit this time. Comes to us from our own Paul Wallace, and Paul says, from Austin, does anyone know about the communication system used in the Tour de France happening right now? Body packs, team car to rider, rider to rider, and so forth. It's very difficult to Google an answer, and he tried.
I don't know anything about it. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, the lead riders have a radio mic, which is linked to the car, their team car that's behind them, and then there's a link to there's always a helicopter above, so they beam up to the helicopter, and then the helicopter beams to the station. It is a very, very sophisticated system that they have for the Tour de France. It's a real big tech that they use to broadcast that around the world.
I think that's one of the things. We may have somebody kind of wander into the first hour, and tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about the Branson stream. But I think that what you saw there was we've been thinking about it, is they just wanted to do it relatively quickly, and it takes a long time to tech out, especially things that are complicated and moving. And so something like F1 or Tour de France, they do it every year. They have a year to think about it, and they might think some about it for the whole year, and then they execute it. And when you do it the first time and you don't have a lot of time, weeks or a month or two, it becomes much harder. Go ahead, Paul.
Ken, why do you think it's so hard to use Google or find anything out about this? It just seems like there's a black hole when you go to search for it.
It's because it's the French network, French TV network that do it, and France. If you can speak French and go to the French Tour de France site, then they might be able to find more information about it. But yeah, they don't. France and Google aren't the best of friends.
Merci beaucoup.
Yep. Next question.
Comes from Paul Wallace again. And Paul says, this time, how would you build a Zoom studio in a cargo container like they do?
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I've had clients do a lot of things with cargo containers, and I never thought of a sound studio. The ventilation is complicated, and just purely the aspect ratio can be very, very tricky, because effectively you have an echo chamber.
I can tell you exactly how they built this one. So because I've been to the one in Erbil. You walk in, doors to the main door. They've cut a door to your right, or to your right. When you walk in, you have a screen. Now they can project the screen from behind, behind you, or it can be a rear projection. And they've done both. I think the rear projection works a little bit better. And then what the rear projection allows for is that you can have either a little webcam right ahead, and that means the projector isn't projecting towards it. And that's the advantage of the longer cargo piece is the back end is where you have projection. And so you can do rear projection. Some of them have holes cut in them. So right at where like there'll be a place above the person's head that is, or to the side that is the hole where you put the camera, so that you get as close to an eye-to-eye contact as possible. They use what's called an octopus. It's a little 1U audio box that does a lot of the mix minus stuff. There's auto mixing on its own, to make that work. And then then some basic lights, and then they have a small computer that's they can run remotely. And so those are that's the basic setup. They may have evolved it. The last time I saw it the last time I was standing in one was like 5 years ago. But that's the basic look of it. And I'll see if I can even find a picture of it while Rupert talks.
APC have also done some work kind of in a related area, building portable server rooms in shipping containers. So they figured out also the cooling and the infrastructure that can go into a container.
It's just circulation. You have to cut holes in it. You're not going to use it as is. So you have to cut holes in it and move air in and out. But it's and then there is a ton of, like you saw, carpeting. We were talking about in the pre-show. There's carpeting around it that they use to kind of deaden a lot of the sound. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, and could you talk about shared studios a little bit, Alex? We talked about it in the pre-show.
Shared studios is really cool. Here I have and this again, this was pretty. This is not actually. I realized that looking at this one, I don't think it was a actual. This is not. This is just the UNICEF camp. Hold on. Shared studios is the idea is that anybody can walk up somewhere in the world and you can talk to someone else somewhere else in the world. And so it's a really powerful idea that anybody can be, involved in the conversation, that you can have, I'm trying to talk and do this at the same time, and I may not be successful.
They've got a ton of examples on their Instagram. If somebody wants to post it in Mukana, here's one of them where you can see that they've got the lights. They got what looks like to be one of those AC units that are one of those ones that you can just put on the wall.
Yeah.
And see the lights.
And it's again. Oh, here, this is a reasonably good one here. Hold on, let me see if I can share this out. I can drag it over here. I always forget.
I have the one from Obama speaking to the people in the containers.
Yeah, and that's the one we actually built. This is let's see. It's not working. Let's see if I cut to this here. So this is the screen. What I was talking about earlier is you can see that they're projecting just some little lights here. And this is the one in Erbil. And, but here is the little webcam that is just stuck right through the screen, so now in this case, they have a front projection screen. In this one's not a container. It's similar shape. Let's see if I can, there's the mic. I think I took multiple photos of it, but it's a pretty they've kind of put these pieces together and now this is a very early version of it. So I think that they've definitely gotten a lot more refined, as they went. So, but it's a really cool idea that people are life size and you can walk in and talk to somebody somewhere else in the world. And they've put them up in Davos and in many you'll go to a big event and there'll be one of those built up in the event, and it kind of transports you to anywhere in the world, and oftentimes they schedule some folks. So if you want to talk to some folks in Afghanistan and Iraq and Korea and Mexico, and you're just able to jump around and possibly see multiple people that are there. So it's a pretty cool concept. Next question.
Comes from our own Rupert McRae here on the panel. And Rupert says, the running total of office hours shows is sometimes mentioned. Do we know how many total questions have been processed during the lifetime of the show?
No idea. No idea. I can hazard a guess that it's probably in the 20 or 30,000 range. Like if you think about it, we have about probably somewhere near 1,000 to 1,500 hours, and we do maybe not quite that many, but we do about 20-30 questions an hour. So yeah, about 20-30,000 is probably the number of questions we've gone through. Go ahead, John.
I was going to say, what are we, 580 or something, Jeffrey?
I don't think we're 580.
We're
We're
at
480.
We're at this is episode number 476. So we're
multiply
talking
that
2
by-
hours.
Multiply that by the daily
Right. So I think that
questions. Yeah.
I think that we're at, if you take the 500, multiply it by 2, and then multiply it by 30, I think that that's kind of, that's not too far off. 20 to 30 questions an hour is about what we cruise at. Jeffrey?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, about 30 questions an hour. If we do 2 hours a day, 476 shows times 2, then you'll get a very rough estimate. But once again, the first 3 months, there was a lot of non-recorded stuff. So, we went multiple hours sometimes, especially on Saturdays.
Yeah, the Saturday shows will skew it a little
but
bit.
I'm guessing it's 20 to 30,000 questions. Next question. It's weird when you think about it that way. When Rupert has it, I was like, I was like, oh, maybe a couple thousand, and then I suddenly did the math. I was like, maybe more. So next question.
Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland is up next. We have a 2-part event where part 2 has to be private for a limited audience. We currently stream part 1 to YouTube and moves to Zoom for part 2. Is there a better, more seamless method for doing this to avoid the hiatus at halftime?
Yeah. There's a couple different ways to do that. The hard part is that one way to do that is to have the private version so that you can have YouTube running. You can stream to one stream key and then share it among 2 YouTube events, one private, one public. The problem is it's better to do the private part first, because once someone's until they refresh the page, once someone's in the event, they're in the event. Go ahead, Jonas.
So what you could do is YouTube added a new feature called Live Redirect. I haven't tested it, how it handles private streams. But what you can do is at the end of stream 1, automatically redirect everything to the private stream. Only the people that are allowed to access that one should be able to access that one.
Yeah, if you're just using YouTube by itself, you can also just have a second stream that's identical. So you just have another encoder. You just have another stream. The easiest way to do it, if you're going to do it afterwards, is you have a second encoder with a second stream that's just private. Everyone that's going to watch the private link just watches the whole show that way. Like they're just in that show. Then when you turn the public link off, everyone loses connection. The only thing that you're going to really lose there is you don't have a unified chat. So they're not going to all, unless you use something like Mukana. But otherwise you wouldn't have a chat across it. They wouldn't have the sense of being in the same room, which maybe is a feature. Go ahead, Jonas.
Depending on if you use the API to manage your broadcast, you should be able to ingest the same stream and then split it off and kill the public one and let the private one go on. The API should support that.
You can, but you don't need the API to do that. I mean, like if you could literally just give people it doesn't sound like it's necessarily being embedded anywhere now. It's just on YouTube. And if that's the case, you could just give someone, the easiest way out of this is just to have two streams, one that's private, one that's public. You turn the public one off, you leave the private one, keep going. You need 2 encoders to do that. But that's not, 2 laptops, or two little B-Links. It doesn't take much to stream a 1080p stream to YouTube. So you can have 2 little things that are running this. You just give them each the same video and then just cut one off. Again, if we were doing the private first, we would most likely use the same ingest point, because then you're just basically turning the public one on. We'd say, okay, now we're going to go to public. You put up a still for a second, turn the other one on, and then start with the live event. And for the private folks, they feel like they're, that can all be done from the same ingest point, but you need 2 if you want to do it afterwards, because otherwise the people won't get kicked out. Go ahead, Guy.
I was going to say, if it's something to where you need the Zoom part to be more like a meeting, then maybe do a Zoom webinar where you've got everybody in as that wants to be on the stage, so to speak, as a panelist, but then remove everybody at the would that work?
I don't know, and I don't know whether Zoom is necessary. I don't know if that's what they need. Like they go to Zoom for the second part, but I don't know if they need to go to Zoom. The one thing to know is that it depends on how many private people you want. Everybody has to have a login, and there's a thing in YouTube that makes this kind of difficult to do a lot of people. If it's 50 people, it's easy. If it's more than 50, it becomes more complicated. I think they might have extended it to 200 now, but it's onerous. It's easier to do something like live stream, where you're able to control access a lot more carefully than, it's really designed more for what you're trying to do, which is a handful of people get to watch it. So that'd be something else to do some research in. Next question.
Comes to us from A. Mitchells in Washington, our longtime questioner. He asks, it was mentioned in chat yesterday that the level of info is liability safe. What does that term mean to people in a forum like this? With topics that can result in damages and injury, like power overhead rigging, what advice is completely safe these days?
I don't know. No advice is really safe. I mean, anything we tell people, we do the best we can to do it. I don't think that we would be seen as an expert in the field. I mean, we've done it a lot. I don't know if someone would come back and tell us that, well, we saw this thing on YouTube and it would be a problem. Go ahead, Bill. Can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Lawyers, I'm from a family of them, often talk about your risk. You're assessing your risk because literally anybody can sue anybody for anything. So the question is, what possible relief could they get, or what is the risk to a panelist here in a general open forum, not presenting ourselves in a professional setting under testimony or whatever? I mean, we're giving opinions, and I would think that our exposure is relatively small. That said, anybody can sue anybody for everything, so you just can't be perfectly safe in this world. That you get shut down if you try to do that.
You have to walk across the street. There's traffic. A lot of this, anything can happen. All right, Paul, real quick, and then we'll move on.
All right, here's my disclaimer. Anything that I say on this show, don't try it at home, please.
Next question.
All right. Next question comes from Ari Block in Tel Aviv, Israel. In bringing in the RTMP feed using a Raspberry Pi and HDMI out, going to a USB HDMI dongle and then into Zoom, the audio was not connected and had to be captured and routed separately via NDI. Is there any way to get the audio directly into Zoom?
All right, go ahead, Jonas.
So the first question you should look into is, are you sending out the audio of the RTMP bridge over that specific HDMI? Because normally a Raspberry Pi is configured to send it out to either the headphone jack or the other HDMI. Never use the headphone jack. That one is 11-bit only. So you have a problem if you have loud sound on there.
You say 11-bit?
I think it's 11.
11? I've never heard of 11. It could be. Or
That's somebody told me that.
It's interesting. It's an interesting number to use.
Yeah. And you shouldn't, if you specify later how you get your audio into NDI, you should be able to get the same audio then into Zoom. Zoom sometimes needs a restart to see an interface that's being added.
Next question.
Rupert McCrae back from Dallas, Texas. This time he says, I watched yesterday's office hours in real time and participated via Mukana while on in-flight Wi-Fi between Dallas and Chicago without a glitch. What other advancements might come to in-flight technology and media in the future?
And you're on United?
American.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because United built and we're using GoGo, or was it Americans? Was it branded as something else?
It was Viasat, I think.
Okay, yeah, because some of the folks have been trying to move away from GoGo, and so they, that's what they used for a long time. And what changed there is that for a long time they were going down to the ground. So GoGo in flight will send it down to the ground. The Viasat will send it up to satellite, which is a slightly longer. It's a slightly higher latency, but much more stable, and a lot more bandwidth. So we're definitely, that's going to extend to a lot more power as we go through it. I think that being able to be connected, I think the problem most people have is that they don't want people to start making phone calls. Like they don't, people don't want other people to start actually talking all the time. Like they don't want the din of all of the people talking. But, and I think that there's some of us that travel a lot that like the fact that we were mostly disconnected because it was an excuse to not be disconnected. Like you were just like, oh, I couldn't do anything about it. When you get totally connected and it's just obvious that you're there, then it's just another, part of the good thing about flights was the vacation part of it, like just disconnected and you can either think through thoughts or just sleep. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, besides completely agreeing with what you just said, because that was my time to disconnect But I think the biggest improvements will be further increases in available bandwidth into the, for air to plane or low Earth orbit to plane. I mean, it's not much else you could do at this point other than continue to increase bandwidth. Latency is a physics problem, and it's a little harder to solve. But
we've done a lot of things. We've run an ATEM switcher from a United flight, and we've done we've tested our clear comms on it, and we've actually, I think Brian's actually moved sliders on mixers, and so we've definitely thought through some of the things that are possible. One of the things that we've wanted to do for a long time is be able to do production up there, be able to do a live stream from the plane. It wasn't usually during a public plane trip, but for a couple airlines, but it was just at the time, this was 10 years ago, it was not feasible. Go ahead.
Well, and of course, given who you used to do work for, they probably had a fairly profound communication suite on board the upper deck of that aircraft.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a I was once told by someone on the plane that I'm 100 miles out. I think I can get there in 15 minutes. And I was like, how did he do that? How's he do that in 100 miles? I was like, oh, he's in a plane.
Yeah, those with affinity for United now flies between New York and South Africa direct flight.
Oh my goodness. You don't have to fly South African. It's great. Next question. I know that was a little political, but it's really not a good airline. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back. I drive a Subaru Impreza with the EyeSight assistance system. Would it be the best camera position for driving and video despite the prohibited areas shown on page 9 of a manual here? And he has the tech info manual for Subaru.
I can tell you where I put my camera for driving is I put it right on the other side of the mirror. So you have the mirror that's there, and you can put a GoPro or a small camera right on the inside. So like if you look at where the mirror is, I know it's in that zone, but well, you kind of see it whited out there, that in that C zone, but I put it right on the other side of the mirror. I literally can't see my camera from where I have it set up. Like I can't visually see it because it's hidden. It's a GoPro that is hidden on the other side of the mirror. Go ahead, Rupert.
I'm familiar with that vehicle, and that EyeSight system is particularly sensitive. It has 2 cameras, and they are right behind the mirror also, and that whole zone is very sensitive. I've had problems with toll tags in that area. To get away from it, you can use one of those weighted anti-slip bases that you can maybe put on the top of your dash and then have some kind of mount coming up that keeps it away from the glass. Just watch out for heat, though. That's the other problem with cameras in front of the windshield.
Next question.
Bill Alexi in Fort Worth, Texas says, we're running an education event to help first-generation graduates transition into college. There are so many questions in chat previously that the moderators were quickly overwhelmed. Who can I talk to in Mukana sales?
You can find me on Discord. You can talk to me about it. We'll work with you. Yeah. So, and we're working pretty hard. Right now, the big push is to get the panel, our new panelist view up, which will make things a lot better here. And we need it to integrate with Zoom OSC and other things. And so we're working on that, but then we're going to be working on making it easier to use. Go ahead, Jonas.
Also, some other things. I really like using bots to help, especially when something happens in chat, to fix problems. One tool that I also always would use is slow mode, it's called on YouTube. So people can't spam post your whole chat like they can post a minute is probably totally fine. So it's at least 1 minute, the volume of the messages go down, and then do something like Nightbot or popular streamer choices. They have a lot of moderation tools.
The trick and why YouTube and Facebook and all these other ones kind of stink is the merging of chat and questions. Like when you pull those apart, things happen really nicely, which is kind of amazing. That I guess from what I understand that Slido got rid of the chat. Someone said that in a previous show, which is kind of devastating to the product. It makes it kind of worthless. So you can't not. I started with no chat, and I learned very quickly why you have it. So it's really interesting that they would do that. Next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles is up next, and he says, any preference on software-based live streaming, for example, OBS versus hardware-based live streaming? And he's specifically talking about live music production.
Go ahead, Carl.
So there's a perfect product. This isn't the hardware I'm going to suggest. It doesn't require a computer. So I think everyone knows where I'm going to go with this. So that's the Extreme. So it gives you super source, which means you can put all your bandmates up on at once. It will stream directly from this. You can get it to go to Restream if you want to go to multiple places. So it can do that. So pretty much this device is the turnkey solution for exactly what you're asking in hardware. And it will cost about the same amount of price as a MacBook Air, I believe.
Right. Yep. Jeffrey?
The counter to that is if you're doing any type of cameras that are using things like NDI or IP connections, you're putting them up on stage, you're putting them on guitar necks so you can get some special angles and things like that. Something like the hardware switcher like the ATEM Mini Pro will probably not be able to help you with that. So actually what I would do is I would put together a mix between software and hardware switching. I think especially if you've got cameras on stage and you're way back by the soundboard. I
mean, the big thing that the big problem that you get into is mixing and matching color spaces, and then the problem with NDI is that it's so compressed that you aren't going to be able to do as much color correction on it, to get it to where it needs to be, which means that it will be the thing that runs the process, Go ahead, Jonas.
And one thing that you really need to look out for, OBS and the ATEM both can work. The difference between using a software versus a hardware is the hardware won't let you do things that break it. The software lets you do that. So if you use OBS, set up your presets, ask somebody how to set up your presets. There are some tricks that really help make OBS stable, and then don't change it 5 minutes. So I saw so many streams going down because they were like, oh yeah, let's just plug this thing in or use this thing for OBS. But OBS can work great if you test it and build your workflow.
Good, Rupert.
If you're going to do it in software, use the best hardware computer you can, most highestly spec'd, and don't use it for anything else. I mean, if you're going to use a computer for your stream or switching, use it. Don't be checking your email, Chrome, browsing, all that stuff. You try and modularize your system.
You're basically buying a hardware system that does what you're doing, and then you're putting software on it. I mean, that's the way when you really want it to work. It's not just something you have on your computer. It's something that's dedicated. The computer's dedicated to doing that, if you're serious about it. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised when we did a pretty big event with this company, BC Live, and Google brought them in, and they said that they had access to the same tool that I did, which was the Wowza Clearcaster, and they also had a LiveView LU 500 or 600, and they wound up using that, and I was like, why would they use that? But then I got it because if our internet went out, they had their backup cellulars going through that. So even though these guys had the pick of the litter, I mean, they could have used whatever they wanted, and they still chose the LiveView. So there's something to be said about hardware encoders, because software, at the same event, we've had software, Wirecast in particular, go bad. And it wasn't particularly Wirecast's fault, it was the machine. So you got to be aware that there are implications to using software, that sometimes things pop up that they're out of your control.
And I will say that for a non-complex stream, I do a lot of stuff where I need big hardware encoders, that I have really grown to love the Elemental Link, because it's just like a little box that I run from it's a tiny little box. It's not very expensive. It's completely administered remotely. It's kind of like the Clearcaster in that sense, that it just does the thing, and it's completely controllable or configurable from the cloud. And so I've really become attached to using it for pretty much everything that doesn't require the complex stuff that we do on a day-to-day basis that, needs lots of channels of things. Go ahead, Doug.
I will reiterate what Guy says, that, hardware and software, I mean, with software, you are, tied to a machine. Sometimes it's a PC, a lot of times it's a Mac, but depending on the event, you plan for failure. So if something does fail, you have a backup. And believe me, in our world, that happens more than we like, but you know what? It's real world, and you just plan for it.
And we send those links out in pairs, so they're just paired up. They're paired on the way in, they're paired on the, and they're just these tiny little boxes someone throws in the corner and gives them the signal, makes them go. The big thing with hardware is it's not usually, software is more flexible and less stable. Hardware is less flexible and more stable. So those are I mean, that's the most thing. Let's jump on to the next question. We're getting behind.
Philip Oler, Katona, New York, is up next. And so he says, when using ATEM Mini Extremes with super sources, will the audio from the video input behave as normal? So if I have 3 camera inputs set to audio follows video, all the audio from all 3 sources will be live in the super source?
Go ahead, Jonas.
Yes. So audio follows video is always active if the video is visible. That's either in a super source upstream key or downstream key.
Next question.
Ken Jordan, Surdy in the UK, and here on the panel says, I have my Blackmagic Design 6K Pro mounted upside down behind me. How do I flip the streaming image?
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
The camera itself can't do it, but you've got the video assist. That does have a 180 degree on it. My suggestion is do a little test. It actually has an auto, the video assist. So if you turn your video assist upside down, it changes. I just want to see if the output from the video assist was always also changed, but maybe not. If not, Terranex.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, the Decimator MDHX can flip it vertically for you if you want to try that.
If it's a 1080p, but if it's 4K, it's more complicated.
Right.
I think does the DVE rotate 180 degrees? You couldn't do it with a super source, but I think the DVE will let you rotate. You can't rotate? I used to be able to. Anyway, Bill.
I'm pretty sure the Lilliput monitors, which will allow you to flip and the rest of that, have a loop through on many of their models where you could come into it, flip, and then go out.
I don't think that they flip, though. I think they flip. I don't think they flip the signal.
You don't think so?
No.
I've never tried it, but I just realized there was all sorts
I'm pretty sure with at least the Lilliputs that we've had, it doesn't flip the signal, because that would be not what we want. Actually, like we have the Lilliput in some position where we need it, and we need it to flip, but we don't want it to flip the signal on the way through.
Okay, then I would look at MarkerTech, which probably has some device that does that will flip or.
And what's flipped, Ken?
It's just that if you look at that's.
I mean, the easiest thing to do here is to mount it the other way.
That's what I'm going to have to do. Yeah, I'm not going. Yeah,
I would fix it in mounting.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah. Next question.
Fix it in reality.
I'm sorry. Forget. Tired. Fix it in post. Wired. Fix it in reality. I'm sorry, Bill. I'm just going to steal that. I'm going to tweet it out.
That's okay.
All right.
My guess. Douglas Carmichael says, Rupert, what's your experience using a laptop on a plane? In my experience with 15-inch laptops, it can be very cramped in coach, and 13-inch screens can be limited for serious multitaskers.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So in yesterday's example, I was actually using my phone and a little Bluetooth kind of earpiece. But you're right. In other circumstances, in coach, anything over 12 inches is hopeless. But the ideal form factor is, iPad size, MacBook Air size, or something like that. All the smaller Lenovo's are pretty good for that too. But in other places in the plane, it's not so difficult.
Yeah. Next question.
Talak Lopez Waterman, our friend in New York, says, could anyone suggest a wireless headset with a good mic for a landline phone system?
Go ahead, Carl.
So Plantronics would always be a good start. They go more expensive, but because you go into landline, it's like 8-bit audio, so microphone's not going to help you much there. This one is pretty good because you can actually get spare headsets as well. So if you lose it, you can get another one. You don't have to buy the whole base station for this particular model.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, so +1 on the Plantronics stuff. It's all pretty good. You can also get dual purpose headsets in the Plantronics range, where it will connect to your landline phone and also have a USB interface to connect to a computer also. And that'll actually provide better, some of those units will provide better audio if you go the USB route, give you some future protection. But also, if you're using a relatively modern landline phone, check out that vendor, that manufacturer, because they'll often have some well-matched headsets for their brand of phones.
Next question.
Ken Jones in Seattle says, Newbie Macbook question. When multiple screens are connected, how does one set an app to launch consistently on a given screen? I can click a dock icon on display 2, but the app launches on display 1. Arg?
Jason?
Right click on the application, and then I believe it's settings or options, and then you can assign it to any one of the desktops, and that should leave it there.
Carl?
Yeah, as Jason said, and you can also do a hard switch off at the wall. So just don't shut down, just do a hard switch off when you turn it back on. It'll just start exactly how it was, restore.
Next question.
Jonas Tatel Reutningen here in the panel. If you could build an MVP for a production video player, which functions which functions would you include?
Go ahead, Carl.
422 control.
Wait, say that again.
422, so serial 422 control, so you can interface with third-party remotes, with controllers.
Mm-hmm. Companion compatibility, but the 422 is good as well. The 10-bit at least. We talked about that. 10-bit and basically for me, just using the AV Foundation to know that it would go out. Obviously compatibility with Dante. The ability to, one thing that was really useful with Playback Pro, I mean, number one is to be able to, move the playlist around while it's playing is super useful. Another thing that is useful is to be able to select something as next. It turns out to be super valuable. Like you have something in a playlist, but if you select something else, that's something Playback Pro had that we really liked. You just click on the next thing and it's just going to go to that. As far as MVP though, that's minimum viable product. I mean, for people to understand, like there's a lot of bells and whistles that a lot of us would like to have. But those would be, some of the basic ones. Go ahead, Courtney.
I've built a number of these over the years on the Windows platform. I'm not sure if MVP you're talking about a Mac platform, but the things I always build into my video players are bookmarks, at least 12 bookmarks that you can put into a video file, and then a hotkey that you can go instantly to that bookmark. The ability to trim a start and an end point.
Oh yeah.
Set independent ins and outs on any video file that are, don't modify the file at all. So it'll always start it, and the ability to save a sidecar file that has all those bookmarks and start and stop marks in it with the same file name and just an MRK file extension, so that every time it loads that, it looks for that MRK file in the same folder every time it loads that video file, and will load all of your bookmarks in, and regardless of file format or codec used. What else? The scalability, the ability to scale the video image within the window, so you can make it, you can zoom in on it or zoom out on it and scale it within whatever window size, and the ability to scale the window as well. The ability to instantly mute it with a hotkey, and then the ability to remotely control anything over Ethernet with regular Ethernet controls. To do the basic controls, start, stop, go to a bookmark, reset to the beginning, etc.
I do think that you can download the demo, but Playback Pro is kind of, other than the resolution stuff, it's kind of a very good minimum viable product that didn't do more than it needed to do, just did the thing that it did really well until it stopped doing that. Their only mistake was really to write their own video playback system on a Mac. That's what got them in trouble. But otherwise, the reason everybody used it was that you could train someone to use it in 10 minutes. It just didn't, and there was some deeper stuff in it, but it was, being able to decide whether it's gonna be a cut or a fade, by the way, and the fade control is useful between products. I mean, between playback. Go ahead, Bill.
You might also look at VLC, which is an open source video playback thing that is widely popular cross-platform and around the world, and just see what they've implemented. I'm not saying you should do all of that, but it might give you an idea of what the community has said is important.
I think VLC is a good example of what, I'm sorry, it's so wonky. Like it's just, it's the, what happens when you decide by committee on how to do things. I know that it's like, well, the community, but it's just like, it's like the kitchen sink is in there and there's just a whole bunch of, it's just to me, it's just a big mess, like it is something I have and I open it because I need it to, it'll open everything, but I would be careful of taking too many guidance from UI guidance from VLC. Go ahead, Courtney.
Now, one thing I forgot to mention is, all the controls, if you do have to have user interface, should be in a separate window so that your video window is clean always and you don't have any information that appears as an overlay in that video window, and all of your other information can be a separate control window that you can move around or hide or
not be able to play two things at the same time. What kept us from using QLab forever was that it had the capability of playing two videos at the same time, and we just wouldn't use it. We wouldn't put it in production because we were terrified that someone would do that. Next question.
Joel in Mumbai is next with, has anybody used Raspberry Pis as an SRT player, mainly for program return feed to guests?
I don't think anyone's done it. I think that SRT, you'd find that you'd have a fair bit of latency there. I think it'd be possible. Go ahead, Jonas.
Yeah, they're using Nimble server. It should be possible. Latency should be fairly consistent at least, and you should be able to tune it down to less than a second. But yeah. Then
Next
also
question.
you go into the weird things where you have to optimize a Raspberry Pi.
Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas says, what types of traditionally in-person events are most suited to digital first conversation, and what are the least suited?
Go ahead, Rupert.
Sorry, it was conversion to digital first.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Carl.
So 3-minute thesis. Anyone who's worked in university would know what these are. So essentially, these are a 3-minute thesis, usually from a postgraduate, talking about the research they're currently doing. These are excellent for digital first because you can actually have them on a big screen in the room, and they can go out to the rest of the world as well, who may be very interested in what their 3-minute thesis is about. So everyone gets treated the same.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Hands-on events. I used to do Ford drives in Dearborn, Michigan on their track. You just can't do that virtually.
All right, the question is, what are the easiest ones? Oh, I guess I guess least. Okay, you said least. Yeah, I think that conversations in general work better for the most part digitally. I know that, like these round tables, we're having a round table. Office hours is a round table that would be impossible in the real world. Like we couldn't do what we're doing in the real world, regardless of the technology. We have these, we couldn't get good camera shots. We'd have 20 people. Like right now we're at 17 people. Think about 17 people on a stage or in a round table or whatever you want to do. It would be technologically complicated to do this kind of thing. As we move towards conversational events, which I think we're going to keep on moving towards. I think what we saw, what Hosmuk has, proven, and what other people are proving here is that you deliver the content, then have the conversations, and it's just a much better experience. And so I think that that's going to replace a lot of things over time. It won't happen quickly because there's a lot of people that are very committed to their old ways. Go ahead, John.
We've seen that charity fundraisers and board events, national board events for national associations, lend themselves to digital first very well.
Go ahead, Hosman.
Yeah, it was amazing. We preloaded all that content on a learning platform, and the folks wrote their exam yesterday. And probably up to the 11th hour, people were accessing the system all the time. And I asked a couple of people, why are you keep going back? It's a fantastic way of reviewing. If I have an issue, I can go back and watch the slide or watch the video. It's just been amazing the impact it has had.
One of the things we were talking about is also exploration and being able to have experts that aren't necessarily on site. So when you do something like a dive or you're doing an archaeological thing, you may not have all the experts. Let's say archaeology, getting everybody to Egypt, we'll just say. Getting them all there is hard. Getting one person there with a camera is not hard. So being able to have that transmit back and then have a virtual conversation about that item somewhere in the world where all you need is someone who can use a camera and follow directions. And then the rest of the discussion can happen, globally. And then you have a global expert group and a global viewing group. All of that stuff can be interacting, and you could do that as a digital first, where you literally had a bunch of rooms that were all, you could imagine an Egyptology one where there's rooms all over the world that have a couple hundred people in them that are really into it. You have a handful of experts and you have someone on site with a camera, and that's a new way of doing that would be much better, not just replacing, not converting, but actually better than the real thing. Go ahead, Jonas, and then Hosmuk real quick.
We had a great one with a press conference where we streamed it, and suddenly a lot of people were online that never would have come to the press conference, but there was also room to watch it. Mm-hmm. And then since the people are there, they got a nice meal and we're happy, and everybody, it's a great format.
Hosmuk, did you?
Yeah, each of the presenters who were pre-recorded were present on Discord as well, per speciality. And the learners felt quite anchored that these folks were answering their questions in real time, 24/7.
Now we're going to go pretty fast. I didn't manage our time very well. So it'll be probably one person per You guys can raise your hand, but I'll pick one person to answer the question. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up first. What camera would you recommend for driving videos? I've looked at the GoPro Hero 9 with a suction cup mount, but I'm concerned about prohibited areas on the windshield and the cup falling off. Would mounting on the hood be more stable at speed?
Go ahead, Carl.
I wouldn't generally mount on the hood. That may be illegal. Everything's hanging off the car. But mounting up near your rearview mirror, I'll probably use a Matthews or Manfrotto suction mount. I wouldn't use a GoPro one.
You want the one that has a little button that pushes in. It'll suck all the air out of it. You don't want one that just sticks. It's got a little button that'll vacuum it. Next question.
Asmuck and Kate Pound says, setting up a new 6-disc Synology 8 terabyte drives needs storage, rather than performance. For example, data access speed, not high priority. What RAID option should I choose, or should I settle on the default Synology H8 SHR option?
Go ahead, Jason.
Standard Synology would be fine. Be sure that you accelerate it with an SSD.
Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. Any recommendations for Rackmount Power Strips with transformer spacing?
Go ahead, Rupert.
My recommendation would be to go with a regular density one and just not use all the outlets, and that'll give you more options later if you need to plug more stuff in. If you go with low density, you're going to be limited by that, but also look at the pigtails.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, one argument for large-scale in-person events, especially in music, is the real-time audience reaction. Could software tools be developed to translate online reactions into physical feedback like fake crowd noise?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I think some of these things already exist. It doesn't have to be noise. It can be any kind of feedback into the real world. You could have glowing lights to represent how much people are liking stuff. There's all kinds of options.
Again, if you're also going from venue to venue, the return on the venue over fiber can be the same as the return in a stadium. So there's no reason why you couldn't have actual audience interaction in a live venue. The key is interacting with live venues that are projecting out and live venues that are returning and putting them all on a fiber network. At that point, you'd have a round trip latency under 200 milliseconds, which is what we have here. Next question.
Tony Mobley's in with, what are the panel's recommendations on using iPhone as a webcam? Best webcam software for the iPhone, and should NDI be considered?
I think it's great. Yeah, go ahead, John.
I use both. I use the NDI when I'm walking around showing stuff to people, and then directly connected, I use Cameo.
That's great. Next question.
John Merrill in Phoenix, Arizona. Anyone using Boom 3D, and what do you think of it?
Boom 3D. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
It worked really well a long time ago, but at the end of the day, I'm kind of a sucker for not trying to goose my speakers into not sounding accurate.
Yeah, once you get used to clean, it's hard to go back to like something that's kind of over the top. Next question.
And this one, the last one in the regular group, from Robert Barrow in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania. I'm looking to buy a new wireless mic for our pastor. What wireless mic systems with a head-worn mic do you recommend? And he lists Shure, Audio-Technica, and so forth for under $1,000.
Go ahead, Carl.
For under $1,000, you can go up to a Sennheiser or a Sony. So they're around $500 US for a single channel unit. Sennheiser and the Sonys get you the better megahertz. They get away from the 2.4 gigahertz, which is Wi-Fi. So they get you away from that, so you get more clearer signal. But don't overlook the 2.4. If you can control Wi-Fi signals in your location, 2.4 can get you quite a long way for a very cheap amount of money.
Yeah, go ahead, Sky.
Would you add an additional headset? I mean, not a standard Sennheiser headset. What headset would you recommend?
I would do is at trying to fit into that price point, I use a Countryman. With a little bit more, I would probably use a DPA. The DPA is going to give you a little bit more bass response. It also depends on your what kind of voice the pastor has. So if the pastor has a higher register, I would definitely use a DPA. If they have a lower register, they can get away with more. And then I would use a Countryman, and I think it works fine for me, but I have a lower register voice. And so you do want to pay attention. All these mics, I mean, we have to talk about, well, it's not the mic. Sometimes it is. So it's not the camera, but sometimes a good lens makes a difference, like specialized lenses. And so when you want to look at the person's register and what kind of response is going to be best for them to do that. So now we're hopefully we're getting to the top of the hour here. And Nick, if you're here, I know that you're in our area here. We're just hoping that you're There we go. Look at that. Okay. Now we're going to switch gears to our second hour, and we are graced with the with Nick Batt. Nick Batt is has done so much, in the music area, electronic music area, producer, remixer, but also has a great a website that really covers a lot of that. Nick, can you give us a little bit about like how did you get started in this area? Like how did you get started in music or electronic music?
Well, music, like many kids of a certain age, it was, bedroom 4-track, what I could afford, writing terrible love songs. And then, I guess my inquisitive mind just kind of said,
and what were your first instruments? What were your first instruments?
My first instrument was, I rented a synthesizer from the local music store.
Do you remember what the synthesizer was?
It was a Korg Micro Preset, which is a kind of thing with a box on one side and a keyboard. I mean, it wasn't very good, but then neither was I. So, I mean, the thing is, back then, music technology was just beginning to become affordable. We could start to hear that kind of cheaper technology in the records that we were hearing, So
can you tell us like what year you're talking about?
That would have been around 82, 83, I suppose.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So things were just getting started. So you started getting into that. Where did it go from there?
Well, I became encouraged to do more music stuff. I got myself a computer. I went on a government course. Back then, they had an ability to kind of fund the unemployed, of which I was one of those. And I learned about MIDI. MIDI was a kind of new thing, and I kind of thought, wow, this changes the world. This changes everything. So I borrowed a bit of money. I bought a computer, and then I tried to get session work, like putting demos together for people, hip hop kids, and then finally into the studio where it sort of started my professional career, I suppose.
What did you do when you started? I'm always curious. What was your first job in the studio?
My first job in the studio, I was a session for a band called an artist called Ampigal, who was on ZTT, which was one of Trevor Horn's labels. So I was like, oh my God, this is the best gig I could possibly get. I mean, my production hero. I was terrible. I remember I was using an early piece of software and there was some sort of bug in it. And there was this pattern that just had all this junk that would crash every time we got to a certain part in the song. And I was trying to manage it, and I really did not know what I was doing. And I apologize for that. If any of them ever get to hear this.
So many of us we're just kind of hacking along, trying to figure it out. And so you started in the studio, you started doing sessions. And where is this in the world?
It's in Bath in the UK. There was a local studio, which was above a nightclub. I was also doing front of house sound, as a kind of just house engineer there as well. So that was the connection.
Right. And then where did it go from there?
I got a lucky break, really. I hooked up with one of the DJs at the club who had a couple of ideas, because I was working with this hip hop artist who was really good, had some great ideas, and he asked his mate to get in, and we worked on that and made it into something that was a bit better than it started out. And then he said, I've got a couple of concepts. What do you think about this? And there was Suzanne Vega a cappella, which was Tom's Diner, and we put the music to that. But at the same time, we were being commissioned by his friend to do a remix of something very difficult, which was Rondo Veneziana, Venice in Peril, La Serenissima. So we did both of those things at the same time. And
now, when you did the Susan, I'm very familiar with the Susan Vega remix, which is amazing. What is the process of doing that? So you have the song, and how do you license that? How do you set it up? How do you separate the vocal from the music? Like, how do you do that?
Well, it was an a cappella, so there was no need for
right.
For
Sorry.
that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But licensing was probably something I should sweep under the carpet. We just sampled it, basically. We sampled it. We put out a white label. I went to work at Glastonbury as stage manager on one of the stages there. And when I got back, everything had gone crazy, because one of the DJs of a national radio station played it. And so therefore, it became big, and it kind of pressurized the label into doing something, but it was a mess legally, and lots of precedents were set at the time, I believe.
Yes, that is one of the larger versions of ask for forgiveness, not for permission, that I've heard of. Just like, yeah, we'll just put this out. And how long did it take you to do that remix?
It took a while because all I had was a very early sampler. So what I'd have to do is fill up the time in the sample, print that to a 4-track cassette 4-track, which I had, and then fill up the sample again, and then redo it, and then print the choruses. So it was all very kind of, you know, old school. And I did this thing whereby when the thing would go out of time, because it wasn't done to a click or anything, we were working to beats, which obviously are fixed tempo. I used to use a pitch bend in the gaps, in the breaths in the sample. So you'd play it, and if it was too slow, you'd slow it down for a second or speed it up, and you'd end up, rather than chopping it into individual words and trigger it, because that was also quite difficult with the technology at the time. Obviously, that's a lot easier now.
What was the technology? What sampler were you using?
I was using an Akai S900. That was
nice.
The you know, which had, I think, about 40 seconds, maybe a minute and a half.
Now, did that open up? Did that song open up new options for you?
Yeah, I mean, as of the time there, you know, as soon as somebody kind of hears it and goes, it's a hit, it's blowing up, you get the calls, and then the calls come in, and we did loads of remix work. I think most people were surprised that we were kind of skinny white boys from you know, a non, shall we say, not very urban part of the country. So that was the biggest kind of surprise for everybody.
Right, and the again, tell us the process. Like, how do you approach a remix? Like, how do you, when you see a song, how do you think about it, but also how do you technically approach it?
Well, it's been a long time since I've been doing any remixes, but I mean, what we would generally do is maybe identify the chorus or a particular line that was melodically hooky, you know, and would just repeat and just jam over it, you know, just try and make something that works. Maybe imagine the way that the chords and the bass would work together against the melody, so it would have a different angle, or just reinforce what was already there and maybe toughen it up. I mean, but it's very much a question of experimentation. I mean, I'm not musically trained, so everything I have to do is kind of pretty much ear. I mean, I can read music if I absolutely had to, but not enough to play it at the same time.
Right. Yeah. And then where did that take you from there?
Well, just a whole ton of remix work. I mean, really, really busy. I mean,
how many years? Like, what years were you doing remix?
We were remixing probably 89, 90 to about 95. And then I took a break and I worked in CD-ROM production, worked on all the Peter Gabriel stuff.
We all did. Like, we all,
yeah.
In the mid-90s, we all took a break and worked on CD-ROMs.
Exactly.
So you worked with Peter Gabriel?
Yeah, a little bit. Worked out there on Eve. And then I was, you know, doing other bits and pieces. I was working with other bands and just kind of behind the scenes, but that was the day job. And then we ended up getting a phone call. I was literally at home and somebody had my phone call. It was a lady called Meredith from Warner Brothers and said, "Hey, are you DNA? Are you still doing that stuff?" And I said, "Yes, of course," which of course was not true. And they said, "Oh, we got a mix that we want you to do. It's Lorena Mechanic and it was Mama's Dance." And they sent it over and we did it. And it went to #1 in the Hot 100, and it was evenings and weekends, and it was just like, wow, you know, still got it, still kind of feel like this is fun. And we were doing it under much less pressure, which made it much more enjoyable. So we would just kind of go, tonight's not working. We both had day jobs, so at evenings, and let's come back tomorrow and have another go. And then we did it and sent it off, and it literally blew up massive. And we sort of started that whole cycle again.
That's great. And then where did you go from there?
Well, I was working about the same time. I'd started a website, sonicstate.com, which is where I'm still there, primarily because of CD-ROMs.
And when did you start Sonic State?
94, I think. Wow. So yeah, 94. Did video in 2000. So, you know, it's kind of early days.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and then after that, I was working with a local band called Goldfrapp, who a friend of mine, Will, we used to share a studio back when we were in the DNA production days. And they said, "Do you fancy coming up and having a crack at, you know, some of this stuff?" And then I started working with them and basically did a whole bunch of work pretty much exclusively for Goldfrapp because they're local.
And what do you do today?
Today, I run Sonic State, really. I mean, that's my job. I'm much more, I mean, I've become a real sort of fan of this program because I'm basically getting loads of video production tips, but I'm very into the whole idea of making things work for video. You know, the studio's behind me, so I do a lot of that. But musically, I do some stuff, but it's not my primary focus.
Yeah. Where do you see, from a music perspective, what are the big trends that you're tracking?
Well, you're probably asking the wrong guy from an age group point of view to predict trends musically. I mean, I would guess. I mean, that's for the kids to figure out. You know, they'll mutate and find, you know, a piece of software or an instrument that gets or mess with the process and break it and get a sound that perhaps we wasn't designed for. And that I'll leave it up to them. I mean, trends wise, I suppose there's a lot more people kind of just jamming and streaming and doing this kind of stream of consciousness. So creating music on the fly rather than, you know, recreating records and thinking that way. So there's a very different way of consuming music these days, which is completely different to when I was doing what I was doing.
How do you think it's different?
Well, obviously the music industry kind of broke and everything became free, and now we're just starting to get back into the notion of valuing art and, you know, music in from a sort of cultural point of view again. And I think maybe that'll shift, but music just became like the thing that you would put on while you were doing something else, and you wouldn't be really listening to it on a good quality system. It would be background operation stuff. You don't sit and listen to something, you know, maybe
I think
so
that
much.
I do think that Apple's focus on that has really changed that, you know, like it's moved things forward. First, we got a bunch of headphones that are a little bit better than everything else. Not a lot, a little bit better. And then spatial audio for me has been something that I pay a lot of attention to. Are you paying much attention to spatial?
I haven't, but I don't really run a lot of Apple stuff. I mean, I'm an Android phone user, and I don't really use any iOS things. So I kind of haven't, and I don't really buy into the premium. I feel like Apple are very good at inventing things that have already been around for a really long time, and just repackaging them very well.
Just making them more popular.
Yeah, well, that's which is fine. You know, that's great.
Exactly.
But I'm interested in finding out. A lot of the people I work with, because I do a weekly show as well, where with producers and engineers, and they're really starting to gear up for Atomos mixing systems, and, you know, they're really kind of taking advantage of that. So I'll probably get into it, but I have no need for it here.
I think that there's a bigger, I mean, we've talked about it in the past on the show, but I think that there's a bigger difference between stereo and spatial than there is between mono and stereo. Like, it's like, you know, it's mono and stereo is like a little jump, and spatial is like way over here. You know, like it's just like this huge change when someone knows how to use it, you know. And I will admit that I spend half of my day working with spatial. So I'm kind of so used to it now. My ears are listening for where everything's going and how it's gonna work. So I'm much probably more tuned to it. But I think that you get used to it, and it's hard to go back.
I suppose there's a certain amount of cynical in me, because, you know, there's been RSS, which before RSS feeds, the RSS audio that Roland tried to push, 3D audio, you know, surround, you know, we've been through these kind of iterations of make it bigger and wider and all of those things. And I mean, I personally, I'm ashamed to say I haven't heard it yet, but I don't have any surround-based systems to listen to it on, which I need to, obviously.
I think the difference is that now there's 200 million devices that can do it. You know, before it was always like 10 of us. They were always like, this is amazing, you know, and so, but it's an interesting puzzle. It is interesting though how you see trends like auto tuning. I just watched this whole thing about auto tuning on, I don't know what channel. I can never remember what service I'm in now. Maybe HBO Max or something, but how it just comes up, and it was sitting around in the industry for a long time. Did you see that go by? Like, was it something that was secret for a while, and then before T-Pain, it was like it was a just kind of an industry secret?
Most definitely. I mean, it was very bad as well to begin with, which is why it's robotic, which is why, you know, if you have an operator who's maybe not experienced, but it becomes a sound, and it's a really good thing. Now everybody's moved on to Melodyne and DNA, which is that. I remember we did trade shows and going to see the presentation of that, and that completely blowing my mind, where you can take the note from within polyphonic audio and change the key and, you know, the kind of chord. It's just crazy stuff.
I think that what no one knows, like we talk about auto-tune, but no one knows that like Melodyne's used in everything now. Like, it's just like, you know, like when I talk to people, like there's a handful of artists that don't have a Melodyne pass, you know, over everything to kind of tighten it all up. Yeah. I know we have a lot of questions stacking up, so we should probably jump into them. Bill, what do we have?
Okay, our first one comes from regular guest here, Angela Eisen, who is in Golden Bridge, New York. And she says, Nick, what would a solid basic package include to start recording music?
Wow. Well, I mean, you know, iPad, phone. I mean, that's the thing these days. Anything that's class compliant with class compliant USB devices, you can pretty much have you could fill your boots with very low cost. I mean, it really, I couldn't give you an exact set of equipment, but you know, your phone, your laptop, anything will plug a compliant USB device in it as long as it's got a modern.
What kind of USB devices do you like?
Simple ones. I mean, I use Focusrite Scarlett here, which is a 2i2. There's later generations of that. What I have to my right, and what I'm coming through, is also a Behringer XR18, which is like a sound card and a mixer together, which is packed full of DSP. And that is really powerful. It's probably, for a beginner, it might be a little bit of a head scratcher, but for simple, you just need 2 in and 2 out, you know, with direct monitoring, and then you're not going to be having to mess around with latency and all that kind of stuff.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next. I've seen videos of live electronic music performances recorded from the analog outputs of a Groovebox or sequencer. Wouldn't there be quality compromises from an added digital analog digital conversion stage?
Yeah, sure. But I mean, if it sounds good, it is good. You know, if it feels good, it is good. It's kind of the amount of recordings that you get that are, you know, when they say, oh yeah, I recorded this on my phone, and just, you can fix so much stuff with modern DSP and software that if it's a real problem, you can fix it. Otherwise, if it's good, it'll be good.
Well, and sometimes it's more of the flavor. I always think about, for me, the clearest example is Big Head Todd and the Monsters' Bittersweet. He recorded it in his basement, and it's incredible. And then he got a bunch of money, and they recorded it again for an album. Something got lost.
Yeah, the vibe.
Like it's not the same song. And it was just something that, you know, to get to your point, it's more about the expression, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, ideally, I mean, the thing about something like the MC707, which I think was in your original question, Douglas, was it's got USB out, so you can stream a lot of that stuff out. If you've got a DAW connected to it and a computer, you can access the individual streams if you want to go that route.
Yeah. Next question.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael again, and Douglas says, would a direct box like the Phoenix Audio N8, and he has a link, add a perceivable sonic benefit when tracking hardware synths into a digital mixer or audio interface?
That's a bit beyond my pay grade. I imagine so. I mean, if you're getting a decent level in and you've got proper transformers in it, DI box is definitely going to be better than, you know, probably just your straight combi jack into a mixer, I would imagine, yeah.
Next question.
Michael Sweeney in Bartlett, Illinois. Nick, have you gotten your hands on a Behringer UBXA, and do you have an opinion on Behringer's re-engineering of analog classics? Thanks.
No, I haven't. I have had a very long and winding relationship with Behringer. Maybe people don't know, but we did the promotion videos for DeepMind 12 and the Neutron. You know, we worked quite closely with them in creating that, which are both synthesizers which are unique and original. I'm uncomfortable with the reissues of stuff that is currently made. I think if it's not made anymore, okay, but if it's still being made, that's a little bit close to that's quite an aggressive move, I think.
What made the earlier ones unique that you?
Well, they sounded really good, and they had inputs from engineers who were doing their own thing, had a vision and followed it. You know, much like the originals that are being, you know, cloned or copied these days. You know, that they just had a thing that made them kind of like, wow, this is different, and it just, you know, it was a great product. I've got a load of Behringer stuff around the place, and those two synthesizers are particularly good, I think, just for what you get, bang for the buck.
Did you see a big change? Some of us at least perceived a change with Behringer once they absorbed Midas. Did that seem to for you? Yeah. How do you think that happened? Like what changed?
Well, they bought in when they acquired Midas. They had a whole building full of really, really good analog engineers who, you know, were prior to that were making fantastically high-end live consoles, which have an extremely wide dynamic range and, you know, can deal with transients. So that all of those smarts were sort of brought in, and a lot of those people were kind of bolted onto the synth products, or were into synths and go, yeah, I'm up for this, you know. So they kind of used their enthusiasm and their brilliance to, you know, because they were brilliant guys up there.
Yeah. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael has quite a few questions in. Here's one of them. Nick, have you gotten your hands on oh no, that was the one I just read. His next one, with online events like these and the ability to try out equipment via mail order, Where does that leave events like UNAM or NobCon?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a thing I'm wrestling with at the moment because we have, our calendar is peppered with shows. NAM, I think you must have meant, is NAM is in Los Angeles, and obviously Behringer is, I'm sorry, in Berlin, there's Super Booth and NobCon. I think it leaves them in a tough place because, I'm sure Alex will agree. Real life events, particularly if you have to travel internationally, at the moment feel risky. And whether it's for your health or just for the fact it might get cancelled at the last minute. I think it's going to be a very difficult few years, to be honest.
Well, yeah, I think that one of the issues is that you have this kind of chain reaction, that you have a bunch of vendors that don't think people are going to show up, so they don't show up. And then the people don't show up because there's not going to be as many vendors. And a lot of these conventions require critical mass to maintain themselves, and they can evaporate very quickly, if they don't have that, that critical mass. And I think that a lot of us also have adjusted, when we have a vendor here on office hours, I feel like we as a group get more out of that hour than I ever got personally out of a walking by the booth, because as a group, we ask better questions. Like as a group, we're smarter than any individual one of us. And so I think that's going to be also a challenge is, for vendors and how to do that. Do you have any, you do a fair bit of reviewing also though, just from your studio, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I agree with that. I think that's a definite issue. I mean, the problem we have when I go to a trade show, usually our team does 100 videos in 3 days. And then when we leave on the Sunday night, they're online. That's done. That is a terrific workflow. Doing it online in terms of like Zoom or with vMix or however we do it, it takes many factors of times more because the other end is usually not as geared up. When I turn up at a trade show, our workflow is massively enhanced. It's geared for that. Whereas they've just got, I don't know where the lead is to plug the, and you spend 2 hours doing a sound check with them when you're trying to do it remotely.
I didn't think of that angle, but yeah, because I don't even let people, when I cover IBC or NAB or any of those ones, if you look at mine, I don't even let them talk. I ask them questions I ask them ahead of time, and then I prepackage the whole thing for them in my head, and then just do a one take, because it's just like, that even just them talking about it, oftentimes people don't understand their own product well enough to talk about it in a short period of time. They know what they sell, they just don't know why sometimes.
Yeah, well, I think maybe in the synth market, people are a little more deeper into that, and the person you're interviewing probably built it. So.
Right. Yeah, that does make it a little simpler. Go ahead, next question.
Comes from our own Jason Bache, and Jason says, "What are your feelings about vocorders? Are they a tired gimmick or a fun and underused tool?"
Well, both, I would say. When it works, it works. When it doesn't, it sounds cheesy, so it's horses for courses. I don't think you can kind of go, I'm going to write a whole album full of vocoder tracks, because probably they will all be, not so great. Maybe one of them will be great, but it's no reason to use a vocoder. It's not going to give you an advantage. Sometimes it has a way of articulating. I think the thing about vocoders that are interesting is when you don't use a voice as the carrier, as the modulator, use something else, and then you end up with all these kind of weird and unusual things going on, which are much more interesting creatively.
And I do think we're going to try to get Bob Heil on to talk about the TalkBox at some point, because makes a lot of the
well, he was the guy, yeah. Although the TalkBox is a bit dribbly, isn't it? That's the thing that I'm kind of, having the tube hanging out of your mouth. It's like playing a trumpet without an escape valve. I just think it's a little bit. It's not maybe.
Yeah. Next question.
Metaphor of the day. Carl Asmussen is next up with, are you looking forward to Sonic State Live from Bristol anytime soon?
Wow. Well, Carl, hey, it would be nice. I think last time we did it, it was literally, we took this entire studio to Bristol, to a venue, which took us, there's only a couple of us here. It took us a lot of organization. Hardest work I've done for a really long time, but it was great fun. I would like to do it again, but perhaps I'd like some more help and an audience who are willing to come. Obviously, that's the big thing.
Do you feel like this is what the big question that do you feel like you need to take all that stuff somewhere and have a big audience, or do you think you could do it online?
Again, yes, I think it could be done. I think the thing is about having going to a venue where you've got 3 or 4 bands, you do the sound check, you know what you're getting from them, you know you're in charge of the bandwidth. I think, yes, it's totally plausible to do this. Live would be scary because obviously there's always the, oh, hold on a minute, my daughter's downloading, you know, a game, whatever it may be, that unless they are all themselves in professional venues, which is probably a bit further up our kind of audience grade and pay grade, you know, it becomes quite difficult. But pre-record can work, and some live, I think, a mix. And we have talked about doing that, and we did it when we did a live show. We did we were part of a live event last year, which had to go online.
Next question
comes from our own Alex 4D Goldner in London, England. When was the last time a piece of music made you make a remix that you knew couldn't be released publicly, a mix you wanted to see move a crowd?
Crikey. That would have been a very long time ago, because like I said, I don't really make music that moves people in clubs these days. I think, like I said, that's for the kids. I don't think I have an answer for that, but it's a very challenging question. Thank you.
Moving on, Douglas Carmichael says, what device have you found as having the most fluid workflow for live track creation and performance?
I think that's quite interesting because, as we know, DAW doorless jamming is a thing. So I think if you're into computers, invest in your templates and, you know, make sure you can, everything's where you need it. For me, it's more difficult because things are moving around all the time. I've got different pieces of equipment in, I've got them in different places. I use something called a 1010 Music Blue Box, which is a 12-track recorder that's just an SD card, records to SD card, and it's a mixer. So I can just, if I'm connecting lots of pieces of equipment together, I put it into that, and then if I think, oh, this is good, I just hit record, and then I've got stems that I can break out. Otherwise, I'm just like the rest. I'll have to make do with the two-track master and just hope that's good enough.
What's your software of choice when you're editing?
Editing video or
both video and audio?
Well, I was in Vegas for a very, very long time. Then I moved to Blackmagic DaVinci, which has been a revelation. And in audio terms, I use Reaper quite a lot. It used to be, back in the day, it was Logic. I was all the way through Logic, but that got lost in various kind of transitions through computers and whatnot. And I don't need it, you know, for anything particularly.
What have you played with Fairlight much inside of Resolve?
Yeah, it sounds way better. I mean, that's the one thing I noticed compared to just the basic tools inside Vegas, for instance. The sound of the EQ, the sound of the compression is usable. You know, it's actually something that I would go, yeah, that's you know, I don't need a third-party plugin.
Right. Next question.
Alex 4D Goldner is back, and he says, if you could remix any track, which song do you wish you had the multi-track for?
Ooh. It's quite an obscure one, and it's going to show my age a little bit. There was a track that was by Ryuichi Sakamoto and David Sylvian called Bamboo Music, and it was on the B-side of something else. I can't remember what it was. And I just absolutely love the sounds, the synthesizer sounds on that. And obviously Sakamoto is a synthesizer legend. So I would like to hear the multi-track of that, and I don't know if I could better it. Maybe I would just beef it up or take all the drums out and make it really ambient and noodly, which is my general flavor of things these days.
I have it actually sitting over here. I have the Shaman's Progen, you know, where they released all the samples separately, and it's just like it's one of those things on my bucket list of, at some point I'm going to sit down and I'm going to remix this whole thing, you know, because I listened to that when I was doing raves. You know, we used that a lot, that album a lot, you know, the records, because you could
Move Any Mountain, all that stuff.
Yeah. So we would use that. It was just really popular. It was the first time, I think it's like an open source song. You know, there's probably 1,000 remixes of that song because of the Progen release, right?
Yeah, the other thing that's interesting about them is, I mean, again, you know, they were very underground, but they were also incredibly pop, very, very strong melodically. When I was in the band doing, you know, PAs and things, they were around as well at that time, and you know, it would absolutely rock the place every time. You know, it's just they got the mix right between credibility and popularity, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Rachel Ann Clifton is up next. Such a pleasure to have you here on Office Hours. Can you give us a taste of a sound you are working on today?
Gosh, if I'd set up for that, I possibly could, but unfortunately, I'm not. What I have on the bench here, which I can say, is that there's a couple of modules from a company called Create Audio, who have been working with a guy called Richard Nicol from Pittsburgh Audio, and it's an oscillator and a filter. So that'll be next. But I've got a jam coming up on Friday, which I pre-recorded, which was just a bunch of Greek dreadbox synthesizers again, and it just sounded marvelous. So
can you explain what those are?
Well, a Greek company, very unusual, analog synthesizers. They have, they call them all with sort of, I think one's called Nyx, which is the god of the underworld, or the goddess of the underworld. One is Erebus, which is obviously the guardian of the river Nyx. And there's a Typhon, and there are three synthesizers that just, there's something about the sound. I mean, I think this comes down to synthesizers can have character and charisma, and there's always do.
Interesting. I have not, I'm not familiar with them. So I'm learning something.
They're not so big in the States, I think. Much bigger in Europe. I'll send you some links. I mean, they sound, when you hear, without going too far off topic, when you hear.
No, there is no topic. The topic is whatever you want to talk about.
When you hear an oscillator, oscillators can be, you know, you'd think all the same, right? It's a triangle wave, a sawtooth is a sawtooth. But sometimes you hear one and you just go, oh my goodness, that on its own is so impressive and so wide and so deep. It's got so much, the harmonics or something about it. And their oscillators sound really good. Same with the Behringer Neutron, actually. The oscillators sound really good. And they're just using these 3340 chips, which everybody uses, but they've figured out how to make it sound a certain way, which is, again, is the engineering expertise. So they're not all the same.
As you watch the industry, have you seen the kind of the electronic component crunch that a lot of us seem to be experiencing?
Well, it's really starting to kick in now. I mean, we're talking to people, well, Dreadbox, in fact, we're talking to just the other day, and they say, you know, there's real problems now with chips and how and you know, components. They're talking like waiting list till 2024. I mean, that's going to cripple some of these people. Yeah.
I mean, literally, we have folks that we know that are not going to conferences because they can't sell anything. Like, you know, they don't, they're like, I don't want to, you know, they don't want to sit there and try to sell 1,000 units of something they can't deliver in 18 months. You know, like that's the kind of conversations that we've been having.
Yeah, I think it's a really, quite a scary prospect. I mean, we've never really had this happen before, have we? So it's kind of.
What do you think are the causes?
Well, I was wondering about this. I mean, it's got to be, obviously COVID's got to be a big one. Shipping containers, we know that's been a shortage for a really long time. I was already hearing things like, we can't get them here because there are no shipping containers because they're all sitting in kind of various countries with PPE in them, you know, waiting to be used, quite rightly. But and I think there was that blockage of the Suez Canal for quite some time, which has got to create a break in the pipeline. It may be that's part of it. I mean, I don't know
the
that
AKM fire.
The AKM fire, yeah. I mean, but with synthesizers, analog synthesizers, not so much of an issue because they're not really using D2As and A to Ds. But with consumer electronics and other sound cards, yeah, so it's a perfect storm, isn't it? It's one of those things.
Yeah. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back with one of the more pragmatic questions here, and he asks, what would you recommend for a stand to hold multiple sequential desktop modules?
I'm a big fan of DIY, so I would probably consider making something that fitted it. But there are lots of, I'm just trying to think of the name. Now, I knew this would happen because your panel of encyclopedic knowledge of all of this stuff.
Do you prefer wood, metal?
I prefer to do it with wood because I can make it myself. Metal can be, but I don't mind really, as long as it's kind of works. I mean, I think the problem is with bespoke stuff. I have this discussion. I mean, this is another tangential thing. When you see people have built these beautiful studios that are just kind of immaculate with kind of everything in a beautiful stuff, it's like, well, that's absolutely no good to me because tomorrow I'm going to have a synthesizer that is this shape. And where am I going to put that? I'll have to redesign my studio to make it look nice again, you know. So generally, I just it depends. If it was live, it needs to be sturdy. You need to be safe. You don't want them falling over. If it's just in your studio, you can afford to be a bit more funky about it and maybe, you know, then put your energy into making it look nice afterwards. So you know,
as I'm designing rooms, a lot of times I've gotten to this thing where I don't make the long desk. I make a bunch of little desks that are on wheels. You gotta move them around so you can spread them out to people. You can pull them into you. You can do a lot of other things in them because to your point, we use them in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
Next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles is up next with, can your guest tell us a bit about working with the artist Goldfrapp?
Sure. I mean, I think I touched on it earlier, which was, you know, I started by kind of just going up. There was a period of time when Alison, who's the main vocalist, was considered, you know, thought of as difficult, which is not at all. It's just a myth that happens around a lot of artists. So I got the gig to go up for a couple of hours and have a go, and we hit it off, and I've been working with them ever since. I mean, I've worked on all of their stuff apart from maybe one record, just a little bit. I used to be very, very heavily involved in playing synthesizers, arranging, you know, pre-mixing, getting the mixing together for production, then taking all of that stuff and creating a kind of a band ready version, which is incredibly difficult because a lot of their stuff is built of juxtapositions and combinations of many things which you just couldn't possibly take out on the road. But figuring out what the keyboard player can play, what you want to trigger live, what you feel, you know, what's going to be, maybe if there's some sort of backing, and it's like figuring out the negative and the positive of this live set. It's all the while you've got production rehearsals going on. There are 20 people there waiting for you to figure out how to program the thing that they need to hear in the next song. I mean, I enjoyed it, but it coincided with my daughter being born, and it was too stressful. So I stepped away from that particular job, but I love working with them. They're great people.
Next question.
Sam Downey in Bristol, England up next. Nick, as I'm from Bristol, can I help with live broadcasts and event for Sonic State Live? What help would you need in any way of broadcast?
Well, I mean, I think if I could just transport, the thing is, all of the stuff that we do is kind of come from the combination of years of figuring it out. You know, my CMS for my website I built, you know, so if I could just figure out a way to take that part of my brain and dump it to you without having to explain it over time, and then you could just know what was being done, that would be the easiest way. But yeah, I mean, there's always jobs to do, and I suppose it's just a question of me being perhaps less controlling and less worried about stuff that's going on, because I much like many of you guys are used to producing and doing stuff live myself, you know, so I'm switching, I'm doing all of these things, and to remove that one step sometimes ends up being less instant and immediate, because there's a longer distance from what I'm saying to what somebody's reading in my, you know, my signals and who they should switch to next or what's happening. So but thank you for the offer, Sam. I know your name. I'm sure we've met past, so I will definitely bear that in mind.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say, in regards to offers like that to help, one of the things, and this is a good thing for everybody to remember, especially if you're new to the business, if you do offer to help, don't expect to be 100% engaged 100% of the time. When you're working, you know, for somebody like Nick or other, you know, masters of their craft, they may need to just sit and think, or they might say, okay, I got nothing for you, just sit calmly here and wait, and be okay with that. It's a pleasure to be able to sit at the foot of a master and to learn, but they're not there for you. You're there for them. So be ready to just sit and be idle a little until they have something that they can give to you again.
I think I asked Nick what the first thing he did in you know, what was your first job in a studio? My first job in a radio station was I walked in. I said, I love alternative rock music, and I'll sweep the floors for free. Like, that was myself. I thought about it all the way up. I had all these long things I wanted to say, and I just walked in and said that one thing, and I did. I swept the floors, and you know, a year and a half later, I was program director. but it was you know, basically a mixture of drafting and moving. You know, you just sit behind people and you help them, and you just do whatever you need, and then you see an opportunity and you raise your hand. You know,
yeah,
so.
I mean, that's what we try and do here whenever, you know, because there's often kids who are kind of come through. We've had a few people come through. I try and just kind of go, well, look, this is what I do. I kind of give them the hour and a half brain dump of what happens in this room. If you can think of, you know, this is a challenge for you. Okay, what do you think you could do? You know, so if you go, hey, yeah, and then I would go, that's a great idea. Thank you. That would be brilliant. sometimes it's, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I mean, I appreciate those words like master are way, way above what I would consider myself to be. But I think observation, if you're in that situation and you're trying to figure out what's going on, sometimes
you worked with Peter Gabriel, you can't be bad.
Well, maybe not. I didn't tell you why I got fired. No, I didn't get fired.
Of course, what we'll tell you is the best way to do this is to just, join our little, join our little band, come here often. And what works is you inject all what you know into the group. And then when you need people, you have lots of people that, kind of have a more similar understanding of things, because we learn from each other. We'd love to have you up. I'm not going to put you on the spot. We'd love to have you as as part of the panel whenever you can make it. It'd be great to have your knowledge.
Well, I may well be up for that. I'm really interested in the video side of things as well. So, I'm not really too much on optics, but this whole workflow here is designed for me to be able to run it on my own with 6 cameras recorded to ISO that I can edit like this.
Well, you look great. Look and sound great. So that makes it easy. I don't often say that. But you quality looks good. And what camera are you using?
Over here, I'm using a 6. What is it? It's a Sony A6000 with some sort of Sigma lens. Again, my business partner, he's the photographer, and he sort of said, "Try this." It's a little bit too wide for me. I've had to kind of zoom it in a bit, but I think we might fix that. And because I've got a teleprompter here, which is how that's working. But over there, GH4s, Panasonic GH4s. Yeah.
Next question.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael again. And Douglas this time says, when remixing, what do you recommend for finding a melodic part from a piece of audio? Would proper ear training be the most effective, or is there any software you'd recommend?
Oh, goodness. There are ways you can extract, if it's a monophonic line, there are lots of ways to extract the melody out of it and then mess around with it. There's, I think Ableton Live has that built in. I'm pretty sure Logic has it built in. Many kind of DAWs have that as a sort of core basic feature. I mean, really, it's like it's an impossible question to answer because there is no right way to do it. It's whatever works, and if it works enough to convince yourself, and then when you play it to someone, you're not going, "Oh gosh, that's actually quite embarrassing. Why did I think that was any good?" Then you're onto something. That's kind of the only way I would suggest it. I mean, sometimes you can just go through the motions and it'll be okay, but you need to be pretty experienced to pull that off, I think.
Next question.
When remixing, asked Douglas Carpenter. Oh, I'm sorry. That was the previous one. Courtney Gooden here on the panel from Hollywood says, do you use any analog synths? And if so, which are your favorites?
I use a lot of analog synths, but not exclusively. And to be fair, a lot of these things are sort of transient. They come through. But yes, I have some favorites. The Dreadbox, as I mentioned, the Dreadbox Erebus is particularly lovely. The Typhon is very nice because it's got built-in effects. So you can create a very large sonic space with just one little box. I really like the Hydrasynth, the ASM Ashen Sound Machines Hydrasynth through a new manufacturer. That's all digital, but it's a brilliantly made performative synthesizer, wavetable synth with polyphonic aftertouch, which is quite uncommon on modern synthesizers, plus a ribbon. It's kind of quite CS80. For those of you who perhaps don't know about synthesizers, the CS80 is the holy grail for many, that's not a Moog. It's the one that Vangelis played. It's Chariots of Fire. It's all of those things, So the ASM has got some of those elements in it, but it's very not analog. I've got a Jupiter 6, which I've had for years and years and years. But again, these are things that, a lot of the time, my requirements are it has to be small enough to fit on the desk, because if I'm using it with another piece of equipment, if I've got this massive vintage synthesizer and something small, then that steals the show. It needs to be sort of in the background compared to the thing that I'm reviewing. So I have different criteria.
Well, what are all the criteria? Like, think about those. That's one basic one. But what comes up for you when someone says, "What do you use to decide whether this is a synth you want to use?"
I think it has to have something that I connect with. If I can kind of feel that there's something called control law, which is quite an important issue with electronics, and not many synthesizers. Some synthesizers are very good with that, like Moogs spend a lot of attention to that, where you have this kind of exponential response, which means that tiny movements at the very start of a pot are very detailed. Stuff in the middle gets wider. Then at the end, you've got this kind of musicality that's seen as very musical. Lots of people with electronics, it's very simple to go, just linear, and that's fine. But for some parameters, it doesn't feel right. So, that amongst many other things, it also has to sound good. It has to feel right. Whether the filter's got a particular sound, what's the gain structure like? Does it have a really hot filter or does it have a creamy smooth filter? I mean, there's many different sort of reasons why I would connect with a synthesizer. Obviously, it has to have PWM, which is a joke for all of you synth memers out there. But those are the things that will speak to me. But sometimes even just having a polyphonic synthesizer that plays sine tones. Sometimes if they sound nice, that's almost enough, and you just go, oh, that's so beautiful. It's really, I think it's in the eye of the beholder, really, or the ear of the beholder.
Next question
comes from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas says, is hardware/software integration like Electron's overbridge technology the future of hardware in a software dominant world?
It does make a lot of sense, doesn't it? I mean, I think the problem with Electron is it almost has to be that, because their interfaces are so impenetrable to the first-time user that
what makes their interfaces so difficult?
They have a very specific workflow that they choose to continue to use. Very, very small LCDs, lots of multifunctions, very complex instruments and fantastic sounding instruments, but a really unfamiliar way of working. You kind of have to learn it, and become a master at it. And Overbridge gives you a full screen UI over USB for some of their instruments, which makes that a lot easier to use. It seems to be it's a very Scandinavian trait, I think, because there are some other instruments that are just sort of seem to be obscurely difficult to use, but maybe that's the sort of test to see how far you can go. Are you up to it, kind of thing. I don't know how that would why that would work.
What do you think it is about the Scandinavians, the Swedes? There was another thing, this whole there was a whole special, the same one that was talking about auto tuning, was talking about how the Swedes have really have a huge impact on pop music. Do you through a lot of this?
Oh, wow. I mean, the list of people who right from ABBA. You start with ABBA and then you work your way up to people like Max Martin, who did a load of the stuff with Britney, and I mean, they are
and everyone what you don't realize is when they start listing all the songs that they did some kind of producing for or wrote the songs.
I'm not sure what it is. I think there's something, and I've spoken. I'm trying not to be too generalizing about an entire geographical, but I've spoken to Scandinavian people about this, and some of their own thoughts appear to have been, well, there's a sort of bittersweet because of the way that the light works further north. Same in the UK. Maybe that's one of the reasons why we're known for pop music, because we have much more variant in daylight, and so there's lots of up and lots of down, and there's a bit more an emotive, maybe we feel blue a bit more often. So if you're happy and kind of everything's great, you're not going to write great music all the time, are you? It's going to be annoying. It's going to be really
yeah, I mean, we've definitely there was I was talking to a historian at some point, and they said the reason we have so much technology is there was a whole bunch of people that were going to freeze to death over the winter, and so they were fighting for enough space to do that, and they kept on developing because they were running into each other and trying to maintain survival. Next question
comes from Michael Sweeney in Belfast, Bartlett, Illinois. He says, Nick, have you been asked to join the Office Hours Remotes band? Please.
Have you heard about our Remotes band?
I have no idea.
We have a band, and you have to join.
Wow. Okay. Well, if I don't, as long as the music's not too difficult, then I certainly consider it.
We'll reach out to you. We'll send you some stuff to listen to. You can decide if you want to join our little band, but it's incredible, like an incredible group of musicians and technologists and mixer. We're putting together. They're putting together incredible. It's not like a little band that plays in a garage somewhere. It's great music. So
it's a band that plays in several garages all over the world.
That's interesting. Well, I have a question for you. How do you deal with the latency of that? Because that's been a challenge all the way down the line.
It's all post. So, it's planned and figured out, and everyone does their part, and then it's all brought together in Pro Tools or Logic. And, it's, so it's building. I think they're in the midst of building up the fourth song, I think. I know that I'm sending a camera out. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, we're in middle between our fourth and our fifth song, and we're doing some really cool stuff. And of course, we can't talk about it, but we have 2 songs that are out right now. The first song we can get you a link to, and then of course the second song we're getting the video. Bill's actually finishing up the video on that.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm up for that. I mean,
Okay.
one thing I will say, you can remote RTP MIDI with incredibly low latency if you feel like doing that.
We discuss all these things almost daily during the band meetings and how we're going to approach things. And I have to admit, if you want to get to know a little bit about the video side of that, we are having so much fun because there's no barriers. You are given this project and say, how would you do it? So you can explore things you don't otherwise get to explore because it's limitless what's possible.
Right. Next question.
Moving on to Carl Asmussen. Here, can you speak to the streaming workflow you use for Sonic Talk each week?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I have 2 computers. I've got my laptop here, which is just for web pages and notes. Then behind me is a PC, i7, I believe, with a whole bunch of SDI capture cards in it, which I don't use that much. I use one for this camera, but I use vMix, so it's all done in vMix. vMix is then streamed straight out of here, goes to Restream. I use this thing, which is for switching, so I've kind of basically it integrates really nicely with vMix. I've used MIDI for years and years and years. Back when I was doing MIDI events to Apple scripts, to run 6 Skype machines. God, it was a mess. It was awful. But now it's very smooth and very quick and very repeatable. So that's what I'm using. Yeah, vMix. It's a game changer for the stuff that I do.
Next question.
Comes from Aaron Huslidge in Durham, North Carolina. And he says, what are the frontiers of innovation these days? We saw a wave with Electron and teenage engineering, but things have sort of settled in. What do you see as next?
Okay. Well, I think what seems to be, I think we're heading for a new requirement and desire for expressivity with electronic music instruments. I've got one of these here. Started off with sort of these guys, the Roly people who did these kind of squidgy keyboards that gave you multiple touch and expression on each
who makes
finger. That? Well, they used to. It's Roly. I don't know if they still make it anymore. They did a big one, which when it first came out was like $5,000. This is still probably too expensive.
Handful of English guys, and it's a really, really cool product to play with.
There's a video on YouTube of a guy playing Purple Rain on one of those, and he's doing it at NAMM, I think, and it's just unbelievable. It's really great.
That'd be Marco Parisi, who is superb. Yeah. So I think essentially it'll be stuff like this. There's a company called Osmos or Expressive E who made a kind of like an XY pad which had left and right movement and up and down. They've got a keyboard coming out this summer called Osmos, which is got the Egan sound engine in it, which is a very powerful synthesizer, and each key has positional data. It's more like a regular keyboard. So you've got 2 sets of touch. So usually when you press something, you've got aftertouch, but it's got an initial aftertouch and a secondary aftertouch. Speed of it. Yeah, that's the guy. And then, but it's designed with the expressive part interfacing with the instrument. It's like a controller keyboard, but it has the synthesizer software built in. And we've had them here. If you look on Sonic State, look for Osmos. We had them in for a presentation, and it was astounding. And it was more familiar, because the problem is with these sort of slightly more wacky ideas, that looks great and it looks like it should be easy. It's really hard to play, because doing this with your hands while you're playing is not very easy. It exercises muscles that you don't use as a keyboard player very often. So you need to work on your technique to be able to play it as well as he does.
Very interesting. Next question.
From Chris Taylor in Winter Park, Florida. What music or bands do you currently listen to?
I spend a lot more of my time listening to the spoken word, really. I listen to a lot of audio books. I listen to the Twit Network. I listen to you guys. I also, but I really like Alessandro Cortini, his work. He's a keyboard player with 9 Inch Nails, but he's a really accomplished electronic musician. And we just released an album actually on Sonic State, which is an 18-track album of all of our contributors we put together, and some of that is really, really good too. I've been listening to that. So I suppose my kind of intense listening days are not currently with me. I don't have time because I find I can't listen to things and work at the same time because I do lots of programming. I do lots of tech stuff. I have to work on a synthesizer, so I can't listen to something else while I'm listening. So I don't get a chance to have as much music sort of going on in the background as perhaps other people.
I love working on graphics because, if I'm working on a graphic or a keynote, because then once I get through like the planning and I'm just laying things out, I can crank up some music and listen to it. But I have the same problem that you have, is most of my day is thinking. and my problem is that because I've done so much video work, that if I listen to someone's song, if I understand the story or I hear a story, I can't stop thinking about the music video in my head. Like I just make up a whole music video and now I can never listen to that song again without thinking about it. And then ruins it. Next question.
Oh.
Michael Sweeney in Bartlett, Illinois is back with, have you ever used any of the Teenage Engineering products yourself?
Yep, I used the OP1. I was one of the first people to review that. It's still one of our biggest videos on YouTube. It's got, I don't know, like a lot of video, a lot of reviews.
Can you explain what what makes them different? What's
Well, again, they're a design company. I mean, one could argue that they are sort of slightly hipsterish in their concept. They're very much driven by the design, and they make beautiful things. Not always the easiest to use. Here's the Scandinavian thread going through this. Lovely people. They did a whole load of modular stuff, which was a great idea, which was kits. I find things that give me friction to creativity incredibly frustrating. If I can't just kind of go, I want to make some music. Oh no, I can't. I need to, do a whole bunch of other stuff first to learn it. Then it's gone. Right. So it's not for me.
Next question.
Sam Downey is back from Bristol, England with Nick. Would you like some help in some mentoring on Dolby Atmos? And he's creating it now, and we can do a live demo on Sonic State.
Well, there you go. It's possible. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure how we broadcast the audio, but yeah, that'd be really interesting. We've also got one of our contributors is putting an Atmos room together at his place. And we've started filming some stuff with him. So maybe it could all come together in a bit. I'm sure you can get in touch with us, Sam. Yeah, please do.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with, the UK government has been carrying out test events to learn how large concerts can be carried out in the COVID era. With the advancements in streaming and virtual tech, XR et al., could the electronic music world pivot to the virtual first mindset?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think to get, I suppose the thing is electronic music is generally aimed at the younger generation who are going to be more open to kind of new ways of doing things, as long as they can kind of maybe figure out how to consume it. I mean, I think that this was already starting to happen before COVID. There were things like there were theatrical performances or musicals that were happening in the West End that were being beamed simultaneously to a bunch of theatres that you go to the cinema and you'd watch a live performance. There would be no audience perhaps in the room, because they'd have a load of cranes and video equipment. And so we're starting, and that was going out to quite a lot of people who were of an older generation. So there is a possibility for that. And I absolutely think so. I just think it's like how does it, who gets the first, who gets it right first, and then that becomes the cookie cutter. I mean, I'm hoping it doesn't become a cookie cutter thing, because we'd like to see lots of different ways of it happening, because otherwise it'd be all the same, wouldn't it? So
I think one of the things that we talked to a couple of folks is what they found was that number one is taking all the synths and everything else to a bar or to a venue is not a trivial thing. So being able to do it in your home is a little bit more straightforward, and that the market is bigger because it's a more vertical market. That's that you now can reach the whole world without having to trek everything down and only have it the market that you're in.
Oh yeah, no, if I understand that kind of puts a different light on the question. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's much easier to do that. Blackmagic have blown that wide open. You've got people who just kind of go, wait, so I just need a $400 or $500 thing, and I've got a bunch of cameras. You can set up. I mean, what they've done has enabled a lot of people to be able to do this stuff. I mean, but as ever, it's the detail, it's the finesse of it, isn't it? It's the Can I do this on my own? Probably best to have someone switching it, because if it's an auto one, it's always going to be pointing at the wrong thing when you turn that knob, or whatever. So yeah, Absolutely. I mean, that has and is becoming much more of a thing, and it will be. I just wonder how these little disparate kind of, guy in a bedroom who's just figured this out can make the leap to a much wider audience, because it's then how do they reach that? Then maybe they'll become a sort of like almost like a label, a record label or an aggregator who kind of goes, this is the cool stuff we found, we've booked them for Saturday night, whatever. So maybe there'll be virtual agents and all of that kind of stuff going on. I don't know. I mean, it's wide open really though, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So great to have you here. Yeah, absolutely. It was really, really great to, and Sonic State is the place that people should just follow. And that's the same name on YouTube, right?
Sonic State. Yep. That's it. SonicState.com is where it all happens. There's stuff goes out every week.
Great. Yeah. Well, we hope to see you. We'll drag you onto the panel every once in a while. Remember that Tuesdays are our audio days, but all the days you're more than welcome. We'd love to have you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been great fun. Thank you.
And there's Discord also. Is he available for Discord?
Yeah, we'll see if we can drag him into Discord. For our producers, thanks for all the great questions. Drove the conversation once again. 400 and I don't know. I think we established is 470 something in. So that's pretty impressive that you guys have knocked it out of the park every single day, 7 days a week. Well done. For the panelists, thank you so much. Great answers, great discussion for the first hour and second hour. Thanks again to Nick for being part of our second hour or being our second hour. And for everyone else, if I'll either see you tomorrow or I'll see you in about 30 seconds in the post show. All right.